His determination to expand the realm of executive power expresses his desire to be king and to be unconstrained in terms of what he wants to do. He claims to speak on behalf of the American people, but he was elected by less than half of the people voting. So there's questions about the legitimacy of his mandate. And the Supreme Court is going to play a crucial role in determining whether his claims to kingship are honored or rejected.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford, and welcome to Times Radio's Trump Report. Today, I'm joined by Professor and leading historian Gary Gerstle, author of The Rise and Fall of the Neoliberal Order and Other Works. Thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If we think back to Liberation Day in April, and we also had the White House saying that 90 deals in 90 days, if you compare that to now, it appears that we only have agreements there with China, the UK, Vietnam. How do you think this has gone down for Trump and the administration?
I think if we look at the stock market, they're not very concerned. I think a lot of drama, a lot of performance, and once again, the draconian and severe tariffs that he's been threatening in his campaign and since being elected have been postponed sometime maybe until August 1st, maybe until September 1st. And the word going around in this country is taco, which I'm sure has reached the UK. Trump always chickens out. I think we're in a world now where there are clearly going to be tariffs on goods coming into the US, somewhere between 10 and 20%, with higher tariffs on specific goods like aluminum and other metals. But right now, I don't see the kind of tariff regime that he has been threatening. I think there was a revolt against Liberation Day, a very severe and nerve-wracking moment in the bond market, which caught his attention. I don't think he wants to reproduce that. So I think we are heading into a more protectionist regime. And if we pull back the lens, we can see this developing slowly but steadily from the first Trump administration through the Biden administration. More tariffs being imposed by the U.S. on goods coming into the U.S. With the expectation that those tariffs will be met by other countries. It's interesting, however, that there has not been a rush to high levels of protectionism on the part of other countries. One of the fears was that the U.S. taking these steps would trigger what happened in 1930, the infamous Smoot-Hawley tariff, where the U.S. imposed very, very steep tariffs. And immediately, many, many countries in the world retaliated with their own very stiff tariffs, plunging the entire global economy into a crisis that then paved the way for the Second World War. That is considered to be a catastrophe. That is the great fear underlying what Trump is doing now. I think most of the world is reacting to these tariff threats the way they reacted to Brexit, which is seeing it unfold. They're saying, I'm not sure we want to do that in that particular way. So things are moving along into a mildly protectionist regime. And the longer this goes on, I think the less chance there is of draconian measures happening that deeply upend the world economy.
When you mentioned the 1930s, how would you say that this does compare to then?
The coming out of the 1930s, the lesson that the U.S. learned was that the withdrawal of nations into autarky and protectionist regimes was a disaster for the global economy and a disaster for national politics, leading to extremes on the left and right. And coming out of World War II, the U.S. abandoned what had been habits of isolationism, separating itself from the world and leading the world into an international order that prevailed from the 1940s, really until the last 10 years, until the crack up of the Neoliberal Order. So this is a abandonment of that leadership role and a desire to return to the early 20th century and late 19th century, early 20th century, to a time when the U.S. built up its industrial might behind significant tariff walls. And I think it's an effort to do it in ways that don't reproduce the calamity of 1930. But the calamity of 1930 hangs over this. The longer this slow rollout goes on, I think the less chance there is of reproducing the crisis of that time. But it certainly announces an abandonment of a commitment to complete openness of borders, a globalized world of free trade without many limitations. In that way, it does resemble the withdrawal of the world from an earlier global free trade period, that of the late 19th, early 20th century, and a desire to erect a situation where there would be tariff walls for specific national purposes. The rationale in the there are two rationales for this move in the United States. One is to reshore manufacturing, both for national security concerns and to bring back good manufacturing jobs, a recognition that the era of free trade caused tremendous hardship for industrial workers in the US, as it did for industrial workers in the UK. A lot of communities suffering mightily from the loss of hundreds of thousands, even millions of those jobs. So there's a desire to bring some of those back. That's one rationale. The other rationale comes from a completely different place. The Republican Party is split between those who want to reshore manufacturing for the sake of benefiting the working class, and those who want high tariff walls so as to reduce tax rates in the United States. And if tax rates are going to be reduced in the United States, where is the revenue going to come from? Well, it's got to come from external revenue. The hope is that tariff revenue can replace internal tax revenue. This is a deep split in the Republican Party that so far they have papered over. But if the tariffs get too high, you'll see divisions emerge in the Republican Party between these two wings.
As you mentioned earlier, there's been that extension of that deadline there to the 1st of August. What does this say about the Trump's administration's negotiating skills?
Well, I don't think they have a lot of negotiating skills. The prime criterion for appointment into the Trump administration is loyalty to the chief, more so than competence in the job. If you look at a number of his key appointments to the FBI, to the Attorney General's office, Robert Kennedy Jr., and these are not people particularly qualified for these jobs, but they have loyalty. Hegseth in the Department of Defense, but they have deep loyalty to Trump and are willing to execute what Trump wants them to do. Bessent in Treasury, I think, is a competent figure, and you can see him struggling to balance loyalty to Trump with sound economic policy that's got to bring prosperity to the United States. And whether he will be able to maintain that balance is something that remains to be seen. The Trump administration would like to bring the Federal Reserve under its control. Right now, it's under the fiercely independent leadership of Lewis Powell, and he's announced his determination to be fiercely independent. But whether he will be able to continue on that path, given the pressure that Trump is bringing on him to lower interest rates, is something that remains to be seen.
And you mentioned earlier that taco idea that Trump always chickens out. And if we compare how the markets reacted this time, when we had Trump sending out those letters to trading partners this week, and we compare that with Liberation Day, how the markets reacted then, how would you say that not only do the markets perceive Trump, but also what implications could this have for the future of the Trump administration? I mean, if there is any.
Taco is currently ruling Wall Street, and the decrease in volatility, very little alarm about the tariff hiatus passing relative to the last time. Wall Street is not concerned about what Trump is going to do with tariffs, and they think they have already priced in the cost of it. The stock exchanges are either at or close to all-time highs. I think the danger in thinking that Trump is going to see this through rationally is that he is unpredictable. He delights in a certain kind of chaos. He is a risk taker. He may decide at some point that given the low volatility in the markets, this is not a time to sit back and be comfortable with tariff levels between 10 or 20%. But this is the time to push the envelope to see if he can get something more. So the comfort and complacency of Wall Street about this is certainly interesting, but it should not be mistaken for their ability to predict the future. The markets get things wrong. There's a strong herd instinct. On the one hand, we think of the market as being populated by very intelligent people who understand how to make decisions about risks. But on the other hand, the herd mentality is there, and the herd mentality works in both directions. It can lead to a kind of exuberance about the possibilities of investment and economic development that is not warranted. And on the other hand, it can lead to deep sell-offs that are also not warranted. So don't discount the short-term effects and possible long-term effects of that herd instinct. And now we have another factor that Wall Street has to take into account, which is the big, beautiful bill that has Congress, which has investors worried for other reasons because the size of the deficit of the United States, the increase in the debt that this will generate. And most experts agree that the debt will increase as a result of this bill, and that it's unlikely that the assurances and confidence of the Trump administration that this deficit will be allayed by stimulated economic growth coming from the tax cuts, that this is going to come to pass. And that raises the question of the confidence that world investors have in U.S. Treasuries as the ultimate gold standard, so to speak. There was a moment of trembling and tremors in the Treasury market earlier in the tariff story. And given that the big, beautiful bill has now passed, this debt is going to become real. The deficit is going to increase in the short term. And the reaction of world investors to what they regard as the safety or vulnerability of treasuries is going to come to the fore. There will be issues about that going forward, and that is something to watch very carefully.
In April, you spoke to Channel 4, especially in the wake of the market turmoil of Trump's tariffs on Liberation Day. And you said how this sort of fitted into a pattern of Trump trying to rule the US and the rest of the world as king without consultation, without involving Congress. I'd be interested to hear if you still think that's the case.
Well, I think what I said at the time, I still adhere to, that he does not have high regard for the U.S. Constitution, for the notion of a chief executive constrained by the power of Congress and by the power of the courts and also by the power of the states. He does not like to be bound by any law that he does not like. He is testing the boundaries of executive power in a way that no previous president has. That continues. And with regard to tariffs, he has now announced yesterday, I believe, in regard to Brazil, 50% tariffs, which will remain in effect until Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, is relieved of having to face a corruption trial and possible jail time. The notion of a U.S. president basing a tariff policy on how another country is dealing with a former leader under indictment and under legitimate prosecution. This is an extraordinary way to conduct foreign policy, to conduct tariff policy. Also, with regard to tariffs, this issue is going to come to the Supreme Court. There is no precedent for a president wielding tariff power the way Trump has done. There is a law that says under circumstances of national emergency and national security, the president is allowed to impose tariffs unilaterally without consultation. Well, what exactly is the national emergency that the U.S. is facing economically that justifies this action? The Constitution is very clear that the tariff power resides in Congress. And a couple months ago, or 6 weeks ago, a trade court ruled that what the Trump administration was doing with regard to tariffs was deeply and profoundly unconstitutional, and they stayed all his tariffs. The next day, it was reversed by an appeals court, not in terms of a decision, but just putting it on hold until the appeals court had a chance to consider it. And the appeals court ruling will come sometime this summer. Then I'm sure it will go to the Supreme Court. And the issue is, does the president have the power to impose these kinds of tariffs unilaterally, given that the Constitution clearly gives this power to Congress? Uh, and what the Supreme Court rules in that way is going to be crucial in terms of determining the future of the tariff policy, and also in ring fencing Trump's determination to expand the realm of executive power. His determination to expand the realm of executive power expresses his desire to be king and to be unconstrained in terms of what he wants to do. He claims to speak on behalf of the American people, but he was elected by less than half of the people voting. So there's questions about the legitimacy of his mandate. And the Supreme Court is going to play a crucial role in determining whether his claims to kingship are honored or rejected. I have been watching the Supreme Court quite carefully. About a month ago, I was encouraged by its seeming determination to place certain limits on what Trump can do. But recently, the decisions have been more troubling. They are clearly scared of Trump and intimidated by him, and not quite sure what to do about the avalanche of executive orders that he is issuing. Goodness knows how many he has issued, which has made it very difficult just in terms of sheer volume for the court system in the United States to deal with. It's not clear that the Supreme Court is going to have the gumption to do its constitutional duty and insist that the Constitution be obeyed.
I want to turn now to the former US Secretary of State, John Kerry. He said that the Biden administration had missed on the issues of immigration for years, and that the Democrats had allowed the US Mexico border to be under siege during Biden's presidency. Kerry said that this had given Republicans like Trump a political advantage. What did you make of this? And also, do you think that this is a wake up call for the Democrats on how they should be approaching immigration?
Well, immigration is the toughest issue for center and left politicians to deal with, not just in the United States, but in the UK,
Oh, 100%.
throughout Europe. What's the difficulty? There are humanitarian impulses on the center and left of these parties, true the Democratic Party, true the Labor Party, true the Social Democratic parties in Germany, and understanding that there are many people suffering in the world from persecution, millions suffering from the effects of climate change, so that their land is either disappearing beneath their feet, literally because of rising waters, or they were eking out a subsistence living on land that has become too parched to support them any longer. So tens of millions of people are on the move, and they are in desperate need of help. And the center-left parties in the U.S. and Europe want to embed a humanitarian impulse in their immigration policy, which inclines them to more liberal policies and more open borders and procedures for asylum and for relief, both for economic and political reasons. The challenge, however, is that the numbers of people on the move is so vast now that one can't simply develop an immigration policy out of humanitarian concerns. One has to also insist on the integrity of a nation's borders, and that rules for entering the country be observed. And voters in democracies throughout Europe and the United States have made it very clear that their anger about open borders is greater than on that matter than almost any other issue. And one of the few social democratic parties in Europe to be doing well right now is the Dutch party. And one of the reasons for it is that they have a strong stand on immigration, much more restrictive than their counterparts elsewhere. This is the context for the Biden administration. I think it's good that Kerry has spoken out. I think the Biden administration fumbled the border issue out of the best instincts to be humanitarian and also honor the lady in New York Harbor, Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, and honor America's tradition of welcoming the world's oppressed and refugees and those feeling economic hardship and political persecution. It's part of what has given America distinctiveness and a kind of greatness over its history. Uh, but open borders is not sustainable, and the machinery for processing people making asylum requests is woefully inadequate. And this has caused enormous problems in the United States, and also a tremendous anger in the electorate, and perhaps more than just about any single issue may account for Trump's victory in 2024. So Kerry is taking that into account. And it's a wake up call to the Democratic Party to figure out how to develop a policy that is both compassionate and humanitarian on the one hand, and that establishes respect for border integrity on the other. There is a path forward for the Democratic Party on this. The entry into the United States through the southern border has fallen to a trickle under the Trump administration. I think the Democratic Party would be wise to keep that kind of border enforcement in place. At the same time, what the Trump administration is doing is erecting an internal police state to go after the 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. And the big, beautiful bill includes huge appropriations for ICE and for customs enforcement. That has got to enable the president to hire another 10,000 agents for ICE that they're hoping to incarcerate in what really will be concentration camps, somewhere between 100 to 200,000 immigrants living without papers in the United States. We saw a couple days ago a performance of power in MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, men on horseback, one quasi tank. There seemed to be no immigrants there who were being rounded up. It was a display of power. It was a display of intimidation. There are estimated to be 1 million immigrants in the U.S. who don't, in the LA area, who don't have proper papers. Does the U.S. really want to round up these million people, most of whom have been living in the U.S. for 5 or 10 or 15 years with children born in the United States, obeying laws, providing critical services to the country? What the Democratic Party ought to do is distinguish between border enforcement on the one hand and treating those who have lived in American society, obeyed the law, made significant contributions to the economy and to the culture of the United States, to allow them to continue living and to revive a package that was very appealing to many Republicans and Democrats in the era of George W. Bush, almost 20 years ago, a bipartisan package of creating a road to citizenship for those in the United States and reclaiming the country's heritage of being a land of opportunity for those who didn't have it elsewhere. This can be combined with a very strong border policy. And I think there is so much anger and unhappiness among millions of Americans about the way that the Trump administration is going about erecting a kind of police state to go after immigrants, that there would be a lot of support electorally for this as well. So my hope is that Kerry's call will stimulate this kind of discussion and lead to an alternative policy toward immigration that is, on the one hand, secure about the border, but at the same time humanitarian in its treatment of the millions in America who have led good lives and contributed mightily to American society and who deserve to remain in the United States.
Gary, thank you so much for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Thank you for having me.